network of routes for the traffic that poured to and from the Great Lakes. Iowa and Minnesota. To the southwest of Wisconsin, beyond the Mississippi, where the tall grass of the prairies waved like the sea, farmers from New England, New York, and Ohio had prepared Iowa for statehood. A tide of immigration that might have flowed into Missouri went northward, for freemen, unaccustomed to slavery and slave markets, preferred the open country above the compromise line. With incredible swiftness, they spread farms westward from the Mississippi. With Yankee ingenuity, they turned to trading on the river, building before 1836 three prosperous centers of traffic: Dubuque, Davenport, and Burlington. True to their old traditions, they founded colleges and academies that religion and learning might be cherished on the frontier as in the states from which they came. Prepared for self-government, the Iowans laid siege to the door of Congress and were admitted to the Union in 1846. Above Iowa, on the Mississippi, lay the territory of Minnesota, the home of the Dakotas, the Ojibways, and the Sioux. Like Michigan and Wisconsin, it had been explored early by the French scouts, and the first white settlement was the little French village of Mendota. To the people of the United States, the resources of the country were first revealed by the historic journey of Zebulon Pike in 1805, and by American fur traders who were quick to take advantage of the opportunity to ply their arts of hunting and bartering in fresh fields. In 1839 an American settlement was planted at Marina on the St. Croix, the outpost of advancing civilization. Within 20 years, the territory, boasting a population of 150,000, asked for admission to the Union. In 1858, the plea was granted, and Minnesota showed her gratitude 3 years later by being first among the states to offer troops to Lincoln in the hour of peril. On to the Pacific, Texas and the Mexican War. The uniformity of the Middle West. There was a certain monotony about pioneering in the Northwest and on the middle border. As the long stretches of land were cleared or prepared for the plow, they were laid out like checkerboards into squares of 40, 80, 160, or more acres, each the seat of a homestead. There was a striking uniformity also about the endless succession of fertile fields spreading far and wide under the hot summer sun. No majestic mountains relieved the sweep of the prairie. Few monuments of other races and antiquity were there to awaken curiosity about the region. No sonorous bells in old missions rang out the time of day. The chaffering red man, bartering blankets and furs for powder and whiskey, had passed farther on. The population was made up of plain farmers and their families, engaged in severe and unbroken labor, chopping down trees, draining fever-breeding swamps, breaking new ground, and planting from year to year the same rotation of crops. Nearly all the settlers were of native American stock, into whose frugal and industrious lives the later Irish and German immigrants fitted, on the whole, with little friction. Even the Dutch oven fell before the cast-iron cooking stove. Happiness and sorrow, despair and hope were there, but all encompassed by the heavy tedium of prosaic sameness. A contrast in the far west and southwest. As George Rogers Clark and Daniel Boone had stirred the snug Americans of the seaboard to seek their fortunes beyond the Appalachians, so now Kit Carson, James Bowie, Sam Houston, Davy Crockett, and John C. Fremont were to lead the way into a new land, only a part of which was under the American flag. The setting for this new scene in the westward movement was thrown out in a wide sweep from the headwaters of the Mississippi to the banks of the Rio Grande, from the valleys of the Sabine and Red Rivers to Montana and the Pacific Slope. In comparison with the middle border, this region presented such startling diversities that only the eye of faith could foresee the unifying power of nationalism binding its communities with the older sections of the country. What contrasts indeed! the bluegrass region of Kentucky or the rich black soil of Illinois, the painted desert, the home of the sagebrush and the coyote, the level prairies of Iowa, the mighty Rockies shouldering themselves high against the horizon, the long bleak winters of Wisconsin, California of endless summer, the log churches of Indiana or Illinois, the quaint missions of San Antonio, Tucson, and Santa Barbara, the little state of Delaware, the empire of Texas, 120 times its area, and scattered about through the Northwest were signs of an ancient civilization, fragments of 4- and 5-story dwellings, ruined dams, aqueducts, and broken canals which told of once prosperous peoples who, by art and science, had conquered the aridity of the desert and lifted themselves in the scale of culture above the savages of the plain. The settlers of this vast empire were to be as diverse in their origins and habits as those of the colonies on the coast had been. Americans of English, Irish, and Scotch-Irish descent came as usual from the eastern states. To them were added the migratory Germans as well. Now for the first time came throngs of Scandinavians. Some were to make their homes on quiet farms as the border advanced against the setting sun. Others were to be Indian scouts, trappers, fur hunters, miners, cowboys, Texas planters, keepers of lonely posts on the plain and the desert, stage drivers, pilots of wagon trains, pony riders, fruit growers, lumberjacks, and smelter workers. One common bond united them, a passion for the self-government accorded to states. As soon as a few thousand settlers came together in a single territory, there arose a mighty shout for a position beside the staid commonwealths of the East and the South. Statehood meant to the pioneers self-government, dignity, and the right to dispose of land, minerals, and timber in their own way. In the quest for this local autonomy there arose many a wordy contest in Congress, each of the political parties lending a helping hand in the admission of a state when it gave promise of adding new congressmen of the right political persuasion, to use the current phrase. Southern planters and Texas. While the farmers of the North found the broad acres of the western prairies stretching on before them apparently in endless expanse, it was far different with the Southern planters. Ever active in their search for new fields as they exhausted the virgin soil of the older states, the restless subjects of King Cotton quickly reached the frontier of Louisiana. There they paused, but only for a moment. The fertile land of Texas just across the boundary lured them on, and the Mexican Republic, to which it belonged, extended to them a more than generous welcome. Little realizing the perils lurking in a peaceful penetration, the authorities at Mexico City opened wide the doors and made large grants of land to American contractors who agreed to bring a number of families into Texas. The omnipresent Yankee, in the person of Moses Austin of Connecticut, hearing of this good news in the Southwest, obtained a grant in 1820 to settle 300 Americans near Bexar, a commission finally carried out to the letter by his son and celebrated in the name given to the present capital of the state of Texas. Within a decade, some 20,000 Americans had crossed the border. Mexico closes the door. The government of Mexico, unaccustomed to such enterprise and thoroughly frightened by its extent, drew back in dismay. Its fears were increased as quarrels broke out between the Americans and the natives in Texas. Fear grew into consternation when efforts were made by President Jackson to buy the territory for the United States. Mexico then sought to close the floodgates. It stopped all American colonization schemes, canceled many of the land grants, put a tariff on farming implements, and abolished slavery. These barriers were raised too late. A call for help ran through the western border of the United States. The sentinels of the frontier answered. Davy Crockett, the noted frontiersman, bear hunter, and backwoods politician. James Bowie, the dexterous wielder of the knife that to this day bears his name. And Sam Houston, warrior and pioneer, rushed to the aid of their countrymen in Texas. unacquainted with the niceties of diplomacy, impatient at the formalities of international